Canada can really cut off electricity in the United States and leave millions of Americans in the dark. It seems impossible, but that threat has already been made, and this time, it may not be just talk. With 25% tariffs imposed by Donald Trump, the relationship between the two countries is on fire, and Canada is ready to fight back. The trade war, which began with tariffs on aluminum and steel, can now reach a new level. An energy battle which threatens to leave entire states vulnerable. Minnesota, Vermont, and New York. They are among the states that most depend on Canadian hydroelectric energy. If Canada does decide to cut off supply, the impact will be immediate. Blackouts, rising electricity prices, and an unexpected economic crisis. And make no mistake, this wouldn't just be a political game. It would be clear retaliation against an unfair rate which could be costly not only for American companies, but also for Trump voters themselves. Trump ignored the warnings. The Canadian government has repeatedly warned that import tariffs would harm not only Canada, but also Americans themselves. Now, with costs soaring and tension rising, the question remains, is Canada still an ally of the United States, or is it about to become a trade enemy? The country is playing hard, and many believe this could be Canada's opportunity to show its strength and become stronger without the United States. But can the United States pay that price? If Canada decides to turn off the electricity taps, Americans will feel it in their pockets. Electricity prices could skyrocket, factories could stop, and the impacts could spread throughout the American economy. The truth is that Americans need to learn a lesson. For decades, they counted on the dependence of the United States on Canada, hoping that the neighboring country would always be a reliable supplier. But now, with the imposition of abusive tariffs and a strained trade relationship, the situation could change drastically. And it doesn't stop there. Mexico and Canada against the United States could become the next big chapter in this dispute. If neighbors come together, USA may face not only an energy crisis, but also an unprecedented trade blockade. A trade war is declared. The only question left is, will Trump back down or double down? If you, an American, are unsure about Trump's policies and want to understand how these fees can directly affect your life, subscribe to the channel now. Here, you find out everything firsthand about this energy battle and the economic impacts that can change the future of USA, and more. Share this video with your patriots, because this information needs to reach everyone. As 25% rates imposed by Trump not only lit a fuse in international trade, but now puts it at risk providing electricity to millions of Americans. Canada, long seen as a reliable ally, now finds himself forced to react, and the retaliation can be severe. With an increasing energy dependence on the United States in relation to Canada, the possibility of cut off the electricity has become a real risk. New York, Vermont, and Minnesota are just some of the states that may suffer the economic consequences of an unprecedented energy crisis. And if anyone still had doubts about the seriousness of the situation, Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, made it very clear. If necessary, we will cut off the power supply. The message is direct and blunt. If the United States insists on maintaining these tariffs unfair, Canadians will not hesitate to respond in kind. But does Trump really believe he can get away with this? Americans need to learn a lesson and understand that every action has a reaction. If the government of USA continue ignoring the warnings, those who will pay the price will be the voters themselves, who will see the electricity price soars and the cost of living increases. The situation only gets worse when we remember that Canada is playing hard, and you are not alone in this battle. Mexico and Canada against the United States. It could be the next chapter in this trade war. Imagine the impact of a commercial alliance between the two countries against an already fragile American market. And while the Canadian government discusses possible sanctions, large energy companies are beginning to calculate the impacts. The truth is that, without Canada, the USA would face an immense challenge to meet their energy demand. Cutting off electricity would not only be a trade blow, but a clear message that Canada will not accept being treated as a second-rate partner. The big question now is, will Trump back down or double down? If he keeps pushing, not only Canada but the American electorate itself could turn against him. After all, which American wants to pay an absurdly more expensive electricity bill because of a political decision? And worse, who wants to run the risk of seeing their state in the dark while Canada grows stronger without having to depend on USA? Tensions between Canada and the United States are reaching a critical point. The energy battle could be the ultimate retaliation. And now Ontario, one of Canada's largest energy provinces, is seriously considering reduce or even cut off electricity to the United States. This decision would not just be a symbolic move, but a direct blow to the American economy. The numbers speak for themselves. Only in 2024, Canada exported about 65 terawatt-hours of electricity to the United States, becoming one of the largest energy suppliers for Americans. And now, with Trump's 25% tariffs, that relationship is about to suffer an unprecedented shock. If Canada actually follows through on this threat, the impacts will be immediate. States like Minnesota, Vermont, and New York, which rely heavily on Canadian energy, would be the first to feel the consequences. One widespread power outage can lead to unexpected blackouts. Factories can reduce production, essential services can be compromised, and worst of all, electricity prices could skyrocket for millions of Americans. And guess who's going to pay that bill? Trump voters, who are already feeling the effects of this trade war in their pockets. And don't think this is just an empty threat. The Canadian government has already made it clear, we will not accept unfair tariffs without reaction. Ontario Premier Doug Ford did not mince words in stating that such retaliation is on the table. Canada is playing hard, and you no longer see the USA as a reliable partner. The dependence on the United States from Canada for electricity has become a pressure point, and now Canadians have the possibility of changing the game in their hands. The country is already strengthening its economy with new international partnerships and can emerge even stronger without depending on the United States. The big question that remains is, did Trump really think he could impose abusive tariffs without suffering the consequences? That trade war could turn into a political disaster for him. If Americans begin to feel the impacts of this clash, with absurdly higher electricity bills, lack of electricity, and collapsing industries, dissatisfaction could grow quickly. And make no mistake, Canada's retaliation could be just the beginning. Mexico, which was also the target of Trump's tariffs, has already shown signs that it may join Canada in give an even stronger response to the United States. If that happens, Americans will face an unprecedented crisis. What once seemed like just a game of tariffs could become a real problem for millions of citizens. The energy dependence of USA. It's not something that can be resolved overnight, and a cut in Canadian supplies could have a ripple effect on the economy. Businesses could fail, jobs could be lost, inflation could skyrocket, and ordinary Americans will pay the price for this reckless trade war. Now, imagine the scenario of a harsh winter coming, with states like Minnesota and Vermont without electricity enough to heat their homes. Imagine big cities like New York facing unexpected blackouts, industries shutting down, and the cost of living rising uncontrollably. All this because Trump ignored the warnings and decided to test Canada's patience. The truth is that Americans need to learn a lesson, and this lesson may come in the worst possible way. Canada may have been a reliable partner for years, but given this situation, the question remains, can the United States still call Canada a friend, or has it now become a trade enemy? And that's just the beginning. If Trump pursues this dispute, Canadians may not only cut off the electricity, but also increase export tariffs on other essential commodities, such as oil, steel, and even critical minerals used in American industry. The Canadian strategy is not just a bluff. It is a calculated move that can put the USA in a position of extreme vulnerability. And if Mexico enters the game, the United States will be locked in a trade dispute that could have catastrophic repercussions. Now, the question is no longer whether Canada will retaliate, but yes, when and in what way. Is the American government prepared to pay this price? Is Trump willing to risk his popularity among voters by allowing this energy crisis to worsen? If the USA thought they could continue dictating the rules without consequences, it's perhaps the greatest proof that the tide is turning, and Canada will no longer be just a sidekick in this trade war. Have you ever imagined that the greatest power in the world could run out of energy? Imagine you taking your cold shower in the middle of winter. Tell me in the comments if this will be an apocalypse scenario. Doug Ford isn't just paying lip service. The threat made to Washington is serious and calculated. If the USA continue with this stance, we will be ready to act. This statement did not come out of nowhere. It is a reflection of the growing indignation within Canada, which is no longer willing to passively accept the unfair rates imposed by Trump. And if anyone thinks that this retaliation will be limited only to electricity, they are very mistaken. Canada is ready to escalate this energy battle and reach the United States on multiple fronts, from the energy sector to industrial inputs essential to the American economy. Experts warn that a total blackout this may be difficult to achieve, as the electrical grid between the two countries is highly interconnected. However, that doesn't mean Canadians don't have other tricks up their sleeves. A restriction in supply, adjustments in distribution, and most importantly, a drastic increase in the cost of exported electricity are powerful weapons that could immediately put pressure on Washington. And this is not a small problem. Remember, the USA depend heavily on the Canadian electricity to power states like New York, Vermont, and Minnesota, and any movement in supply could have severe impacts on millions of Americans. And if you think this retaliation will be limited to energy, think again. Canada has an economic arsenal ready to be used against USA. In addition to cut off the electricity, the country can restrict the export of oil, steel, and rare minerals, essential components for American industry. Imagine the impact on automotive production, civil construction, and even the technology sector, which depends on minerals such as lithium and nickel to manufacture batteries and electronic equipment. If Canada turns off that spigot, the United States will have an even bigger problem to deal with. And this brings us to a crucial point. Trump may be picking a fight that will affect voters themselves. Who will be the first to feel the impact of these measures? American consumers. Electricity prices could skyrocket, tariffs on industrial products could trigger inflation, and entire sectors of the economy could be forced to scale back operations. Companies will have to pass on these costs, and workers will feel it in their pockets. And all of this could have been avoided if Trump had listened to the warnings that his 25% tariffs would be shooting yourself in the foot. Canada, on the other hand, is playing hard and can come out of this dispute even stronger. The country is already seeking new trade agreements and strengthening its relations with other global powers. If Canadians were previously seen as supporting players in international trade, now they are proving that they can survive and prosper without dependence on the United States. The question now is the United States ready to lose one of its most important allies because of Trump's stubbornness? And what about the political impact of all this? Trump may even want to show strength against his neighbors. But the bill for this trade war will be paid by the American voters, which will see its expenses rise as Canada strengthens. With new elections approaching, this conflict could be the trigger for a revolt within the country itself. After all, how can we explain to voters that, while their electricity bills increase, jobs decrease, and products become more expensive, Trump continues to double down on this insane race? Mexico, which is also in the crosshairs of Trump's tariffs, may join Canada in further expanding this retaliation. Mexico and Canada against the United States. It's not an impossible scenario. In fact, it's becoming increasingly likely. If the two countries decide to restrict the supply of essential resources to Americans, Washington will have to deal with a much bigger problem than just a tariff dispute. It could be the beginning of an economic isolation that the United States is simply not prepared to face. Canadian retaliation is not just an empty threat. The government has already made it clear that it will not back down without a response, and all options are on the table. Now it remains to be seen. Will Trump continue to test Canada's limits? Or will he finally understand that this trade war could be too costly? Canada truly has the power to cut off electricity in the United States. Or is this all just a bluff? Many experts believe that dependence on USA regarding Canada for energy is real and undeniable. Minnesota, Vermont, and New York. These are just some of the states that depend directly on Canadian energy to keep their electrical grids running. The interconnection between the two countries was built over decades, and any disruption in this supply could bring devastating economic consequences for Americans. But the big question here is not whether Canada can cut off supply, but whether it is willing to do this as direct retaliation for the 25% tariffs imposed by Trump. The reality is that Canada is playing hard, and the threats made by Doug Ford's government cannot be ignored. Even if a total blackout is difficult, Canada has numerous strategic ways to pressure USA. Increase exported electricity prices, gradually decrease supply, and prioritize alternative markets are just some of the ways this trade war can be made even more painful for Americans. And if anyone still doubts the impact this could have, just look at the numbers. Trump ignored the warnings, and now American voters will pay the price. But what would happen if Canada actually decided to turn off this energy tap? For the United States, finding an alternative quickly would be practically impossible. The options would be few and extremely expensive. The US government could try to fill this gap with domestically generated energy, but costs would skyrocket, and consumers would be directly affected. The price of electricity would suffer a brutal increase, and millions of Americans would see their electricity bills explode overnight. Factories and industries that rely on cheap energy could be forced to halt production, creating a domino effect on the economy. And Trump, how would you react? He could retaliate with new sanctions against Canada, making this trade war even more intense. But is the American government willing to take that risk? An energy blockade could turn into a gigantic diplomatic problem, putting USA in an extremely vulnerable position. Meanwhile, Canada could seize the opportunity to expand its business with other global markets. Stronger Canada without the United States? This may be closer to happening than many imagine. And what about the political impacts within the USA? With dissatisfaction growing, Americans need to learn a lesson about the consequences of Trump's policies. He may insist that his tariffs are a strategic move to strengthen the American economy, but the truth is that Canada's retaliation could turn the tide against him. After all, which American voter wants to pay more for electricity while Canada prospers without having to depend on the United States? The answer to this question could be the key to the future of this energy battle. Now, the burning question: should Canada really cut off power to the United States? Do you think this retaliation is fair, or would it be an exaggeration? Leave your comment and share this video so more people know what's really happening. The trade war between USA and Canada is rapidly transforming into an energy battle unprecedented. The possibility of an electricity cut is no longer just a distant threat. It is being discussed at the highest levels of the Canadian government, while Americans are beginning to feel the consequences of the consequences in their pockets. Unfair rates imposed by Trump. Minnesota, Vermont, and New York are already at the center of this crisis. And if Canada really decides to act, millions of Americans will pay the price for this confrontational policy. But what now? What will happen in the next few weeks? Will Trump give in and try to renegotiate, or will he double down, risking an energy collapse and an even stronger reaction from Canada? What is at stake here is not just a trade dispute, but rather the position of power between two countries that were once close allies. Canada, once seen as a reliable and predictable partner, is now playing hard and making it clear that he will not accept being treated as a second-rate country. And with Mexico closely watching this situation, it is not difficult to imagine a scenario where the United States are embroiled in an even bigger trade dispute. The question is no longer whether this energy war will escalate. The question is how far this can go and what the impacts will be on both sides. The next few days will be crucial in defining the course of this crisis. Canada should really cut off power to the United States to force a Trump retreat? Or would this be a decision that could be costly for both countries? We want to know your opinion. Leave your comment below and participate in this discussion. And if you want to stay up to date with everything that's yet to come, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This crisis is far from over, and we will bring you all the updates firsthand. Don't miss the next chapter in this battle that could change the future of North America.